Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. Today, I have the honor to introduce you all to Dr. Belinha De Abreu. Dr. De Abreu is a global expert in media literacy education, focusing on the development of critical thinking and global perspectives through her research and books. Welcome to my channel.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You are the president of the International Council of Media Literacy. Could you
Mhm.
talk to us a bit about the organization's mission and its role in being a pillar in the field of media literacy research?
The organization's been around actually since probably the 1960s. It's kind of morphed over time, changed names in part because obviously media has changed as well, right? We've seen that evolve with time. And the work of the International Council for Media Literacy is about bringing together researchers and practitioners and nonprofit people and anyone who is interested in growing the depth and the work of media literacy both in schools, in communities, in academia, of course, but to forward motion this work that I feel like we've all been doing for over, certainly for me, 29 years, to get it to the point where it becomes a common dialogue and a common language that communicates to people the importance of understanding how the media unfolds in our lives.
Mhm. Yeah, and definitely the way I saw how your organization works, I feel like a key aspect of that is teaching people how to critically think.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's kind of difficult to be able to thoroughly analyze a piece of media, but I do think that in the recent decades, at least from what I've seen online, that there has been a much more people have been more open to discourse when it comes to criticizing different pieces of media. But a common complaint that I've also found against that is, oh, like I can't enjoy anything these days. So do you think it's possible to still enjoy a piece of media knowing that maybe its origins or sources have like inherent biases or discrimination?
Absolutely. I think part of it is, one of the things that I certainly will say, speak for myself, is I approach media from understanding who I am within the media. Often, we'll say, where is the me in media? And we have to look at ourselves in terms of what our likes are, what our dislikes are, why we choose certain things to watch, to listen to appreciate or not appreciate. And we're not all on the same path, and media is selective and subjective, right? And so we have to think about that as well in terms of how we want to understand the world around us. The difference with being a media literate person is that you actually take in this idea that you have your preferences and somebody else has their preferences. And sometimes you align together and sometimes you split apart. And the splitting apart doesn't mean, though, that you can't still have relationships or can't still have, a commonality. It just means that in certain times, those preferences and choices just take us in different places. It also doesn't prevent me from appreciating something that you might like or something that you might enjoy. It also means that I have to be aware that there are biases as well in the fact that I like a certain thing and the fact that you like a certain thing or that you prefer a particular channel. And if we certainly were to go down the more serious end of this, when it comes to news media and so forth, that there are certainly preferences being selected by people about the choices in which they would like to hear their news from. And some people will say that's good, some people say that's bad, and so forth. But I think it's really about looking at the wider lens of how all of us are involved in the media, and the choices that we take and partake in certainly give us a lens to the world that other people may not have and provide other perspective.
And yeah, that's a very inclusive way of looking at how people should view media. But what about people that are creating pieces of media? Do you think there is a line between a person or the creator having a preference or a belief
Mm.
and the actual truth of the matter?
Sure. I mean, look, I think, everybody who creates is making a choice of how an image is being put out, how they've selected to take that image, what music choices are put in, what pieces of information are there, what pieces of information are left out. There is this acknowledgement in every creation that it's only telling a piece of the story, and maybe there's more to a story. Some people don't like that, though. Some people would prefer that only their story be told in exactly the way that it's told, as if there were no other possibilities. And I think that adds sort of some problematic measures to conversations because um, there is obviously the factual pieces of information that I think are super important. But if you are a creator for a program or a creator for a podcast or a creator for, you know, some kind of filming, whether it's a documentary, you are including in those creations your personal perspective as well. Hopefully, historically perspective as well, if you want to, but some people are not doing that. Some people are there just to put out, frankly, misinformation and disinformation, right? We know that to be true. And that's also a point of view as well. Like, why is that the choice that's being made, which we don't question enough? We tend to think it as like it's wrong and that's that, but there's a reason behind that as well. And where does it come from? Because in every piece of information, there is the possibility of people taking it for what it is, which is the factual piece, or for someone to think that there is actually more beyond what is considered facts, right? And so that actually is why some of the fact checking programs that are out there, which there are a plethora of now all over the world, doesn't actually enhance the knowledge base of a person. And that's where I think media literacy education really can do great work, which is to get people to think beyond just the simple fact checking or the simple piece of information that a creator may put out.
Hmm. And what do you think? Well, okay, so a person can know the facts, but knowing the different perspectives different people have on the facts may lead them to be a bit more well-rounded. But then what do you think exactly gives these people, like what exactly are we learning from learning about these different perspectives?
Well, I hope we're learning that there are point of views that are different from our own. And some of them are completely incorrect, right? We actually have to acknowledge that too. There are things that are true and things that are definitely untrue. But beyond that, I think it gives us once again this idea of we are more than one thing. People are multifaceted and their ideas are multifaceted as well. And when we are looking at media, we have to see that coming through in the creation. And acknowledge that there is an individual who's making choices. Same thing with the newspapers and you know television productions. You know, there's an editor. There's somebody who's putting things together, who's making determinations about what news stories are getting covered and what news stories are not being covered. And I think, you know, certainly here in the United States, we see probably more of that because we have less covered than I think our international counterparts have. And one of the things that I love about the organization, just to, you know, even speak about that, is that we have representation from people from all over the world so that it does provide this wider maybe holistic lens to a certain degree on perspective and understanding and lack of understanding as well. Because often I think that part of the mis and disinformation comes from a lack of understanding, whether it's from the actual piece itself, perhaps it's a cultural piece, perhaps it's a global piece, but there's a lot more to that. But to see that, you have to actually, I think, in some regards, be media literate.
That is definitely very interesting. I think that challenges the preconceived notion that everything has to be wrong or right. And it kind of
Yes.
shows that, yeah, everything's not so black and white.
Not always. And I think certainly there are moments of that. Don't get me wrong, there are certainly moments of that. But oftentimes I find that there's a little bit more to the question. And what we need to do as people who are partaking in the media is to ask why or how, or poke further to understand more. And that might take a little bit more work than you know, the basic of, oh, okay, that was an interesting piece, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I see. And funny thing, you mentioned the US earlier. I was just going to ask about, so for the past 2 years, I would say, both in the US and outside, there has been major political events going on. And I see a lot of polarization when it comes to
Right.
opinion and beliefs on these events, whether it's the recent election, including the events leading up to it, and also conflicts outside of the United States that either the United States have been involved in or have been very vocal about. So I think whenever I see these two different or three different sides or multiple different sides arguing, many times the insult that they throw at each other is, "Oh, you are so uneducated."
Hmm.
But we know that there's not, I mean, education rates are definitely rising. It's at an all-time high. So how much does the lack of media literacy contribute to that polarization and just like the difference in beliefs or even incapability of understanding each other?
I think it's that's a really interesting question because you also mentioned how the rise of education rates, but I question what that rise looks like because certainly in the United States, I would say that the things that we need more of is civic education and understanding of historical background. There seems to be, a sort of I don't know if I want to say like a it's a lack of transparency in terms of this part of our education system. Because in the United States, everything is done by states, it doesn't mean that across 50 states we're all getting the same education, which is something very different than in other countries where it is usually set by the Ministry of Education and there's a more of a definite lineage from the top down to the from the country to the people in the country. We don't have that as much. We have a Department of Education, but that does not mean that they can deem and require certain things to happen in schools and states, which is why there's a splintering. I think that one of my concerns is that you're not media literate if you don't have consistencies as well, and that's common knowledge to a certain degree. It's also an understanding of content. The questions that we ask in media literacy are about getting people to think further about an event, a moment, a teachable moment, wherever it may be. And to get you to the point to get to ask those questions, you need to want to question things. And so the questioning of whatever it may be, it needs to start at a young age, which actually, when you look at little children, they always have that questioning mode, right? They always ask why. Well, why? Well, why, right? We hear that. But as they progress, they start asking the question why, because their job in education seems to be to appease whatever the educational directive is so that they can, get the grade, so that they can move forward. But the questioning stops. And I think that's where there's the critical misnomer here, where we're not providing these opportunities for students to really delve deeply into subject areas. We're speeding through curriculum, we're rushing through different things, and then graduating and then sending them to college, where there's a hope that somewhere in college they're getting that piece, what we're talking about. But unfortunately, and this brings us back to the polarization piece, um, colleges and universities are polarized as well. And instead of being these beacons where you can have these deep discussions, there's a lot of people who sit in college campuses who want to shut down voices of people who could provide, the different perspectives that even if you disagree with them, it's about the dialogue and the transparency of that dialogue. And some of that seems to have been set aside, especially in the last several years, which is concerning. We really should want to develop students who do think deeply. And to think deeply, you have to ask questions, and sometimes hard questions. And those hard questions lead you to answers, and sometimes answers that we want, and sometimes answers we don't want. But in either case, they're leading us to progress further. And I think that's what media literacy offers, is a possibility for progression in a direction that allows for, besides deeper thinking, a community that really can have civic discourse.
Mm, yes, that was beautifully said. And I think definitely the relationship between free speech or freedom of expression is a huge part of how entire society can be media illiterate. And not having that ability, whether it's at institutions or maybe online spaces, is going to be detrimental.
Yeah. I mean, we need to have more of this respectful discourse so that we can engage with people that we don't agree with. It's okay. We should have those moments too. We should be able to understand that. There's a commercial that's being done now. I think actually it's by a beer company, where they put people in the room who are from very different backgrounds in terms of their belief system and so forth, and they put them in the room with them not knowing what those backgrounds are, and they have to build something together, and these people are able to do that successfully, and then what they believe about things is then put out on the screen, and the choice is, do they want to sit and have a beer with this person to have a bigger discussion or not? And in the commercial they do. Now, obviously, it's a commercial, so somebody's created this amazing story to tell, which we hope, would transcend beyond that, right? But I think the point is that we are more alike than we are not alike, but to find the likeness means that we have to stop looking at the things that we're most angry about. And that requires a depth of thinking and a depth of willingness to have that kind of discourse.
Mhm, definitely. Let's talk a bit about the recent rise of AI and how that contributes to media literacy. So, one thing that I found interesting is whenever tools or technologies like ChatGPT, for example, when they take in these, well, like massive amounts of information, it also processes the inherent bias that comes with it.
Yeah.
So I would like to ask, how can these marginalized communities or people being discriminated in work to perhaps reshape their representation or even the way that these technologies view these groups? Is there any way that we can redesign these tools for perhaps more equitable use?
Well, the best way would to be have representatives of each group creating the AI, right? Because then they would be parceling inside of the AI that flexibility to actually acknowledge the differences. Um, Listen, the AI issue is huge. It's huge, and it's massive because we haven't thought about ethical protocols. We haven't really acknowledged what you're talking about in terms of biases. We've seen little pieces. There was the film The Coded Bias. There were people who really looked at how AI was identifying or not identifying people, or assuming identification, which I think is also interesting because there's this idea that AI doesn't assume anything, but of course it is. If it has been inputted certain protocols and certain pieces of information about community based on what it's picking up, because the AI right now is literally acknowledging all the work that's been out there, which really says something if a lot of it is so biased, right? If the representation of it is coming through in this way, there's a lot to be said about what's written and what hasn't been diffused before this period. So now we have an AI that is relating to us in the way that it assumes based on what is already in front of us. And so I think, in the media literacy world, is a lot of, I think, excitement about AI to a certain degree, but there's also a little wariness that comes with it too, which is that we need to have that discussion. In front of the AI, it should be the human. Before anything else, it should be the human. And that acknowledgement has to be there before we allow, different AI protocols to take over. Now, on some other level, AI has done tremendous things, right? And it's not to say that we aren't using it anyway. We are. We've been using AI probably without us knowing it for years. I mean, all of us have cell phones. We already know there's been little things in our cell phones. There are other tools that are in our homes. And I think AI in medicine has done tremendous work. But I also have these concerns that once again, we aren't always thinking of the human factor through all of these different situations. And I think that needs to be front and center. I'm not sure that we have solved anything with the AI. And I say that by saying because of the fact that every time a new tool comes, people will say, oh, well, things are going to get better now, things are going to improve. But with every new technology tool, something is lost. And I want us to remember with AI in particular, because it is so advanced and it has incredible power, we also need to keep in front of us what is it that could possibly be lost when AI becomes front and center. And so that's part of the work, I think, of us as we're processing through information, as we're thinking about how things are put in front of us. How do we ask those questions so that we can determine that we have the right protocols, the right tools in front of us, the right answers, perhaps, and the best information to move forward?
Hmm. Yes, definitely. AI, after all, is only just going to be a tool. And it's really the person or people that puppeteer it, or that's kind of a strange word, to manage it,
Right,
that are really responsible. Like
right,
I was just looking at Instagram the other day, and there was a video I saw of someone asking an image generating AI to generate an image of a business person. And the AI generated first was a white man in a suit. And then the person user kept on asking, why did you choose the gender? Why did you choose this race? Why did you choose this outfit? To
right,
test the AI's understanding of bias. But then
right,
even as I was watching that video, I realized that all the decisions the AI was making still has to do with the person. And it doesn't inherently understand that things it's doing is biased, or maybe it's
right,
not fair in some way. That was just
right.
very interesting.
No, and I think, I actually, it's funny. I was trying to generate an AI image recently, and it kept saying to me, you must provide more specifics, because it wasn't giving me what I wanted. And I was like, well, I'm looking for this, and I'm now going further detail. But what I found more interesting was that the more specific I was being, the more difficult it was for the AI, because it's so much
Mhm.
easier to pick from the easy things that are out there, right?
Yeah.
Which is to say, really, that media literacy isn't necessarily easy, by the way. It means that you have to do work to actually want to think about getting better information. It's not difficult once you get used to it, but I think like the AI that requires you to be more specific, you have to want to be more specific and want that piece to generate. And so it's a lesson for us when it comes to using the AI tool, which is that it really likes it to be easy too, um, and sometimes easy is wrong, and I think that's what probably there's the commonality is that the choices that we make sometimes have to be difficult ones in order to get the best answers, and or certainly push us to think further. And I think with the AI, there has to be a lot more thoughtful analysis about what it means to use it in a way that will fundamentally be good for humankind.
Mhm. And let's move on to our last two questions.
Sure.
So a news that I read a while ago was that America or the United States, some states are considering banning phones for students, and
Yes.
it has like inspired some thought. I thought it was interesting because I saw it as an argument between, well, first of all, the issue was that how are we going to protect kids against all these things which are media related? But then the argument I saw was, should we protect kids by not exposing them at all or exposing them? And I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on phone bans and also this argument?
So a lot of this has been kind of initiated to a certain degree by the book The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, who is basically saying that students shouldn't have cell phones, or excuse me, smartphones until they're 16. And he has some other, pieces in there as well. So I think what I find really interesting is that there's a lot of people in the media literacy world who are very much against what he is saying, and think that cell phone bans should not be. And then there's a lot of parents and a lot of people in the community who absolutely think that cell phone banning should happen. smartphones, because I can't say cell phones because he doesn't have an issue with a traditional cell phone. Uh,
Mhm.
so I'm going to say this as a media literacy educator, this is where I think we need to use our perspective more. Why is it that we can't have two thoughts live in the same realm? That we do actually provide some kind of banning, but we also have media. And I think this is sort of one of those odd moments where the assumption is if you ban smartphones, you're banning media, which of course that's impossible, right? I actually think this is where media literacy is incredibly important because we know that the usage of media is even before a child is born. From the moment a parent knows that they're going to conceive, they're sharing images on social media, they're doing all sorts of other things. So that has to be a piece of the puzzle here. I think that parent groups need to have media literacy education to understand that the media is going to be a part of their lives. It will be a part of their child's lives. And how much of their child's lives do they want to have infused with media? And where are some limitations where they could be in? I think schools have suffered tremendously because smartphones have been a dominant force within the schools that has taken away the attention span of young adults. And for people who say that that's not true, then they need to spend a year in a school system to see it, not a day, and come in and say, oh, kids are fine. Spend anywhere from 6 months to a year and actually watch it happen, watch it in the classroom. Then there are people who say, well, it takes away from their creativity. And if that's the case, then what did we do before all of this technology was in place? Because we've had super creative individuals forever before we ever had technology. So that actually is not true either. And the issue about emergencies and the whole thing, that's why the cell phone piece has come in as well. You can use a cell phone. It's a matter of a smartphone, which has a lot of technology, which has a lot of power in it. And it's really about the fact that there are a lot of students who sit with these phones all day long and they don't actually interact with other humans, even their friends. And if they're interacting, they're sitting together in a circle and they're not even looking at each other because they're on their phones. We watch adults doing this. I mean, I think that's what I find surprising about the push against the bannings and the phone bannings is the number of people who actually are not looking around them and seeing that there are real issues happening every day. People who walk across the street now who look at their phone and don't look at a car coming at them. Like there are things that are obviously happening. But I think when we're looking at young children, there is brain development that is there. I don't, there's a whole conversation obviously about the mental health issues, and I don't want to say that smartphones are the sole part of why there are mental health issues. I do think they're a part of it. And we can't say that they're not. We know that we've seen some pretty um, devastating things happen because of how smartphones and social media are used and the lack of having time to disconnect or the willingness to disconnect. If there was that disconnection, perhaps we would have a different kind of resolution. But I do think that we need to look at the full picture of it. I'm not saying that we should ban phones in every single case. I think there are times we do need to use it and we should teach the way to use it. So I think bans have to come with more thoughtful consideration of how a tool can be used in a positive nature, just as much as we have to think about how we want future generations to be using these tools in a positive way.
Mhm. Wow, that was very, very thorough analysis of the
I think
argument.
I thought about this a lot. Sorry.
And I can tell the passion. And yeah, last question of the interview today. And this because this channel is for my generations, for Gen Z, I'm just curious if you had to give your one best piece of advice for Gen Z, what would it be?
I would say learn to listen to people and learn to listen well.
Hmm.
One of the things that is missing is this ability to actually stand in front of another person and to take in what they're saying and not put yourself in their place, but literally Be responsive to how they are speaking to you and listen to all of it. Listen with your eyes, listen with your ears, listen with your emotions, and listen with your thoughts. It's a very difficult place to be right now when our minds are distracted often, when our technology is distracting us as well, and when it is easier to not be connected than to be connected. And to be connected and connected well, you need to want to listen and to engage. And for your generation, I really want you to have those opportunities because some of the best relationships in your life will be with the ones that you actually have these moments where you listen and you are able to engage in a deeper level that connects and resonates with you and perhaps changes your path, it changes your thinking, that lends you to another opportunity or another thought or another chapter. You never know.
Well, and that is great advice to end on. And just before I do my ending segment, I just want to let you know that my Zoom call is ending in 30 seconds because I have
Okay.
the premium version, but you can just hop back on. And that is some great advice to end on. Thank you so much, Dr. De Abreu, for giving me this opportunity to talk. I think we covered a lot of topics that are very much relevant to the society and especially my generation, Gen Z. I believe that media literacy or illiteracy is going to be one of the biggest challenges that we face. And I had a very enlightening and insightful conversation today. Thank you so much.